What do you think happens when a boy grows up without a man in the house to teach him how to be one? Does he magically figure it out from TV or from his mom? Or does he learn the hard way through heartbreak, arrest, bad money moves, and broken dreams? I grew up without my father around, and if this was the case for you, or it is now, I've got some good and bad news for you. Let's start with the good news. You're not alone. If you grew up in a place like where I did in the projects, where father was either just a name on the birth certificate, you never even met the guy, or he was locked up, running the streets, or just outright ducking responsibility, then this ain't really news to you. That was me, living in the projects with other kids, going to school with other kids from the projects, and until I got out of Northview Heights estates, I didn't know any better. And on a side note, why do the worst projects always have the nicest sounding names? Cabrini Green ain't green, Queensbridge ain't regal, Magnolia has no flowers. They're always something nice, sounding like gardens, manors, or villages. A cat I met in the Army said he was from Moody Manor out in Chicago. I think that was the name of the project, and I think that was the city. Let me know in the comments if I got that city and project right. Now, I'm not saying only black kids grow up like this, but I am a black dude, and my experience is based in black neighborhoods. Even the two white ladies who lived in my project that had men living with them dudes weren't real catchers. One caught domestic abuse charges like the cops gave out WIC checks every time they picked him up. But that's a story for another video about how people in the bottom of the social ladder have to work harder just to get to the middle. My point is that I didn't see a stable two-parent household until high school, when I started spending time with kids far above my socioeconomic level, many of whom, though not all, were white. So the good news is if you grew up without your dad around, you've got a lot of company. Now the bad news. Growing up without a stable, present father figure is linked to nearly every negative life outcome imaginable. I don't care how loving your mom is, there is no advantage to not having your dad around. Contrary to what some others might have to tell themselves to sleep at night, she can't do it all alone, at least not well. There's an old Chris Rock joke that goes, "You can drive a car with your feet if you want to. That don't make it a good idea." I get it. Sometimes relationships don't work out. Sometimes fathers are toxic and dangerous. That's why I emphasize stable and present. Being raised by an abusive addict is worse than being raised by no one at all. But both are bad. Imagine two gardens, for example. One has no gardener. It's left to the weeds, bugs, wild animals, and random weather. The other has a gardener, but he's always drunk. He stomps the sprouts out and rips up anything that grows and pours gasoline on the soil because he's mad that the plants won't grow. Which garden do you think has a better shot at producing something good? Neither is ideal, but at least the first one has a fighting chance. You want your dad to be the kind of gardener who protects, nurtures, and strengthens you against the world's worst elements until you can stand on your own against them. Without that, you risk becoming emotionally deformed, socially dangerous, or both. The goal of parenting is to raise a person who adds value to society, or at the very least, doesn't make it worse. But many fatherless children end up as burdens instead of assets. According to data from the U.S. Department of Justice and longitudinal studies, 75% of adolescent patients in substance abuse centers, 85% of youth in prison, and over 70% of high school dropouts all come from homes without a father. You're not just more likely to become a statistic, you're almost guaranteed to, unless you do the work to rewire what got you built wrong in the first place. That's what the rest of this video is about, giving you a game plan to fix the gaps you didn't even know were there, so you don't destroy your relationships, land in jail, or worse, end up repeating the same cycle with kids of your own. But before we get to how to fix it, let's look at why dads matter so much. What is it about a father's presence that makes his daughter less likely to start an OnlyFans and his son less likely to end up in prison? And why doesn't just being raised by your mother exert the same protective effect? Well, there are a few things going on here, but the easiest one to quantify is that houses without fathers tend to be poor. Two incomes are better than one, and more money allows you to live in neighborhoods where you don't get desensitized to gunshots, police sirens, and having a wardrobe of all one color so you don't get your ass beat. Someone once told me that the only things you really give to your children are their genetics and their zip code. In other words, it doesn't matter how good of a parent you are. Eventually, kids grow up and start making friends. If those friends come from stable homes, there's a much better chance they'll emulate those qualities. Again, this was my story. I was in ghetto feeder schools in elementary and middle school. During that time, I was suspended from school almost 20 times and even got arrested because of a fight I got into with a kid when I tried to sell him powdered sugar as fake cocaine. When I went to that high school across town with people a few socioeconomic levels above me, most of whom lived in two-parent homes with a stable father present, well, I haven't been in an unsanctioned fight since I was 14 and haven't been in any legal trouble since. Beyond just providing the means to not live in the ghetto, a father's absence affects a child's developing brain. When a father is involved, really involved, and not just around on weekends or dropping off a check, his presence shapes a child's mind in profound ways. Kids with involved dads show healthier development in the parts of the brain that manage stress and emotional control. For example, the amygdala, which plays a big role in fear, anger, and how we respond to threats, develops differently when dad isn't around. And the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain heavily involved in decision-making, like not robbing someone or throwing your life away over petty drama, grows stronger when a father is consistently in the picture. Big studies like the ABCD Project and the Bucharest Early Intervention Project have used brain scans to show how much stronger those regions of the brain are in children who grow up with parental presence, especially from their fathers. When there's no dad, the brain doesn't get the same training. You become more reactive, less stable, and easier to hijack by stress, fear, and peer pressure. You're either too soft to deal with real conflict or too volatile to manage it wisely. Either way, you end up easy to manipulate, quick to anger, in a constant, low-level fight or flight survival mode. Anyone who's ever been around the hood knows how emotional these guys are. The whole YN culture is basically this. And YNs, for those who don't know, stands for Young Negroes, except it's said with the soft A instead of the hard R. And no, I don't know what the white equivalent is. We used to call them wiggers in my day, but even that doesn't quite compare to a YN. Now, most dudes end up like that. And the stats on the share of violent offenders who grew up without their parents reflect this. I landed on the other side of things. I became passive and afraid to stand up for myself because I got used to that behavior coming with swift and severe physical consequences. While a lot of folks my age are completely against ever hitting their kids because of experiences like this, there's still folks who lack self-awareness of how this stuff messes you up and who think hitting, not spanking, but beating and whipping your kids is cool. Frederick Douglass once said that it's easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men, and the research is clear on how beatings break children before they become adults. But they continue the cycle, so the cycle is never broken. Now, don't get it twisted. I never let anyone just steal off of me, but I tried to be overly friendly, and when that didn't work, I gossiped and talked trash. What does that sound like? Not having your father around affects a young man in such a way that he starts to behave like a woman. Now, I don't mean this in terms of sexual orientation or preference, though there is some disturbing research that finds a slight correlation. I mean that, like all children, a young man models the adults, or in the case of not having his father around, the adult he spends the most time around, his mother. The problem is that he is not a woman, and the world will make him painfully aware of this fact. Generally speaking, women are favored in modern Western society. We see this in everything from the abundance of women in higher education to the deficit of women in prisons and homeless shelters. It even starts when they're younger, as we can see that boys are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. For all intents and purposes, women are treated as a superior class, or at the very least, boys are treated like defective little girls. The thing is that women are generally shielded from the negative consequences of their bad decisions, either by societal expectation or legal enforcement. For example, if you're out with your girlfriend and she starts some shit with a random man, not only are you expected to fight on her behalf if the situation escalates, but her attacker would be considered in the wrong for physical retaliation, even if she did something to warrant the attack. And that's even if she got in trouble at all. And if she does, the law is going to be far more lenient on her than if it were 2 men fighting. The problem boys face when raised without their fathers is that their examples of behavior come from someone who will not receive the same level of punishment for their indiscretions. A man can't afford to act the same way as a woman because he will not be judged like a woman. I don't mean to say that women aren't capable of being responsible, only that there is a much greater margin of error for being a woman than being a man. This comes through in relationships too. I once dated a girl who told me something that pissed me off at the time, but I know she was right. She said, "You don't know what a good relationship looks like because you were raised by a single mother. Back then, I brushed this off as disrespect. She was dysfunctional as hell too. But now I get it. I didn't grow up seeing a man and a woman solve problems together. I didn't see patience, compromise, or stability. I saw conflict, dysfunction, and survival. And that seeped into every relationship I had. It affected how I talked to women, how I responded to conflict, how I showed up emotionally. And it always made things worse. This isn't just anecdotal either. A study done on over 1,400 adolescents found that kids who grew up without their fathers are more likely to become sexually active at a younger age. Other studies show they're more likely to have children young, marry without education, and end up in unstable relationships themselves. For girls, the absence of a father is tied to earlier puberty, earlier sexual activity, and earlier childbirth. For boys, it's often the opposite, later puberty, but earlier reproduction. So not only are we broken, but we're confused in our relationships, and if that wasn't enough, we've got no confidence to speak of. Now, confidence is tricky because a lot of guys mistake being loud for being respected. I was one of them. For most of my life, I thought being liked meant I was winning. I thought if I was the funniest dude or the most fun to party with or the wildest storyteller, then I must be doing something right. But being liked and being respected are two different things. When you grow up without seeing men get respect the right way, through accomplishments, integrity, strength, and discipline, you settle for being liked, and you settle for the wrong kind of attention. You either start acting out or you start chasing validation from anyone who gives it to you, even if it's shallow or self-destructive. That's why so many kids from homes without fathers end up using drugs, breaking the law, or throwing their lives away. Not because they're evil or stupid, but because they're empty, confused, and desperate to feel like somebody. And when you don't know what's valuable, you start chasing the wrong sources of value. Where I came from, the ultimate measure of a man was how many women he could sleep with. One of the most common insults you'd hear was, "I get more bitches than you." That was the scoreboard. That was what we chased. And the more I look back, the more I realize how pathetic that is. Imagine turning 30 and your biggest accomplishment is that you get hoes. The dysfunctional old heads used to say that you ain't a man unless you got burnt before, aka an STD. On the other end of it, I've seen low-quality men raised without their fathers in their lives completely seriously and without any awareness of what it implied that a man without kids is a red flag. I guarantee you that people with a decent male role model at home don't think this way. When you don't have your father in your home to model a functional relationship with your mother, the woman you chase, and you will chase because that's where your validation and self-esteem comes from, will also be broken with low standards, unresolved trauma, and their own daddy issues. So even if you win, you still lose. You got validation from someone just as lost as you were, and you pass that dysfunction down to the next generation if you were dumb enough to reproduce with her. That's how the cycle keeps going. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that single moms can't raise great kids. I know plenty who have done it. But what I am saying is this. When you don't have that father figure, that masculine balance, it's like being dropped in the middle of a gunfight with a knife made of plastic. You can survive, but it will take a lot more work and you will take a lot more hits than necessary. And no one will say that because you survived, you're an example of how to do it. But this type of survivorship bias creeps in all the time when it comes to kids being raised without their fathers. So if you didn't have your father around, now you know what was missing. You weren't weak, you were under-equipped. And you can't fix the past, but you can make the future better. And the first place to start is with your body. Play sports, any kind. It doesn't matter if it's at the basketball, or it's basketball at the rec center, wrestling at school, or boxing like I did. Sports are one of the few places in society where masculine values like discipline, sacrifice, delayed gratification, and accountability are encouraged and celebrated. You learn how to handle losing without letting your emotions get the best of you. I'm not saying that you won't feel bad, but you learn that how you feel about something doesn't matter if it's vital to your success. Many women don't learn this lesson because the world very much caters to a woman's emotional needs. So your mother is ill-equipped to teach you the hard lessons of life. Now, this isn't guaranteed, and I'm not saying that all women are incapable of imparting these hard lessons, but it's unlikely simply because the world reacts to men and women differently, meaning they have different views of the world. Sports teach you how to practice when you don't feel like it, stay calm under pressure, work through your emotions instead of getting run over by them. Most importantly, sports teach you that nobody cares how you feel, only what you can do about it. That's a hard lesson for a lot of young men from broken homes to learn, but it's one of the most valuable. Then, go make some money. But not just any sort of job. Get a job where people treat you like trash. Seriously, work in customer service, be a waiter, a cashier, or the guy at the call center who gets cursed out for things he didn't do. Why? Because customer service work is like a paid internship in emotional discipline. That's where you learn to stay calm when people test you. That's where you build the type of patience and humility most men from broken homes never develop. The key is to go into this work to learn how to keep your cool and to be polite with people. You want to learn how to temper your emotions and in environments where it would be easy and honestly understandable if you lost your cool. However, if you did lose your cool, you would pay for it with the loss of your livelihood. And that is the lesson you want to learn. Consequences. After that, work in sales, because sales is where you learn what you're really made of. It's eat what you kill. Nobody's going to hand you anything. If you don't perform, you don't eat. That right there is the closest thing to a rite of passage most men will ever experience. But more importantly, you learn how to connect emotionally with people in different ways. Yes, it's self-serving, but that's fine. If you can become an excellent salesperson, you've learned how to connect with people when, in many cases, they're already wary and distrustful. This again requires emotional control, but unlike sports or customer service, there's less of a structured framework, and you'll learn to deal with a different type of rejection and letdown. In sports, you can just tell yourself the guy was better. Many times he actually was. In customer service, you're being paid the same as everyone else, and if someone treats you like shit, you can just rationalize that it was their snotty attitude. But in sales, the failure is almost always because you did something wrong in the connection process. We're not talking about door-to-door sales where you can get rejected right from the jump, and that has nothing to do with you. But something more like used cars where, as Alec Baldwin's character in Glengarry Glen Ross says, a guy don't walk on a lot unless he wants to buy. Now let's talk about romance. Everyone talks about daddy issues, but mommy issues are just as real and destructive. If you're a young man raised without a father, odds are you don't understand women. You either put them on a pedestal and let them ruin your life, or you treat them like enemies you're trying to conquer. Both are recipes for disaster. So here's my advice. Focus on building yourself first. Stay off the grid and on the grind. If a woman fits into your plan, that's great. If she doesn't, let her go. Don't sacrifice your future for 5 minutes of pleasure or some temporary validation. That's what got your parents into this mess to begin with. Funny thing is, when you focus on becoming a man worth respecting, the right women start to take notice anyway. You won't even have to chase. Now, it's not as simple as something like lift weights, make money, girls will follow. There are some other things you have to do in terms of putting yourself out there. But when you raise the level of your life, you start to develop a more discerning eye anyway, and this can save you years of trouble. You won't just fall for the first thin-waist pretty face with a fat ass that talks to you. This can literally save your life. At the very least, it can keep you from making mistakes that will take at least 2 decades off your mental and financial health in terms of child support and court costs. You're probably craving respect, validation, and even love from women because your dad never gave it to you. Or you never saw it from your mom rightfully because she was pissed at your dad. And that's not your fault, but if you don't recognize it, it will become your problem. It's way too easy to put women on a pedestal or go chasing validation in the form of sex and attention when what you're really looking for is acceptance. That's how you end up simping for chicks who don't respect you, getting played, and becoming one of those angry dudes who hate women because you're expecting them to fill a hole that they didn't create. You need to spend time around men who had solid fathers. Men who treat women with respect but don't base their entire identity on how much attention they get. Watch how they move. Learn what it looks like when a man knows his worth, and whatever you do, don't confuse female approval for personal value. That mistake will cost you your confidence, your time, and maybe your future if you end up getting yourself into a home that makes you create a fatherless home because you have to leave or feel like you have to leave. Without your father around, you're open to many negative, abusive, destructive elements. Sadly, many times those elements are from your own mother. Watch this video right here to learn about my experiences being raised by a single mom, how they messed me up, and what I had to do to fix them that goes even further than just this video's lessons.